This is IAQ Radio, Indoor Air Quality Radio, the voice of the indoor air quality industry, with your hosts, Radio Joe Hughes and the Z-Man, Cliff Zlotnick. And now, Radio Joe Hughes.
Good day and welcome to IAQ Radio Plus, episode 706. This week, we welcome back Dr. Jie Zhao, Head of Delos Labs, for a show on keeping our buildings and homes a safe oasis. Really important show at this point in time with the heat extremes, wildfires, hurricanes, heavy rains, train derailments, ozone action days, and many other issues. It's going to become more and more frequent, and it's important to keep our buildings prepared to provide a safe oasis. Before we get started, let's thank our sponsors. They're the reason we can continue doing the show. And don't forget about afterthoughts.iaqradio.com, sponsored by First On Site. IAQ Radio Plus marquee sponsor is First On Site Property Restoration at firstonsite.com. IAQ Radio Association sponsors are ACGIH, the American Conference of Governmental Industrial Hygienists, at acgih.org. AIHA, the American Industrial Hygiene Association, at aiha.org. IICRC, the Institute for Inspection, Cleaning, and Restoration Certification, at iicrc.org. The Restoration Industry Association, RIA, at restorationindustry.org. The Environmental Information Association, EIA, at eia-usa.org. IAQ Radio industry sponsors are Particles Plus at particlesplus.com, TSI Inc. at tsi.com, Tramex Meters at tramexmeters.com, and Healthy Indoors Magazine at healthyindoors.com.
And now you can win a cool prize. It's time for the IAQ Radio Trivia question. Be the first to correctly answer. Simply email your answer to czlotnick at cs.com. Or if listening live, just text your answer from your computer. And now, here's the Z-Man.
Hello, everyone. Congratulations go out to Doug Conan, Aerotech Environmental, Kettering, Ohio, who was first to identify Brazilian epay as the hard and durable wood that sinks in water due to its density, as a Class A fire rating, and was used to build the Coney Island Boardwalk. The IQ Radio Trivia question for today, July 21, has been sponsored by TSI Inc., an industry leader in precision instrumentation for monitoring indoor air. Learn how to expand your IAQ investigations at tsi.com. Here's today's IAQ Radio Trivia question. Name the inventor of the first personal protective mask containing a charcoal-based filter, which removed more harmful gases than previous masks. Back to you, Joe.
Okay, Dr. Zhao is the head of Delos Labs and an executive vice president at Delos. Delos is a wellness, real estate, technology company headquartered in New York City. Dr. Zhao leads the research team to support product innovations and market strategies. His research focuses on human-building interactions, and his PhD is in Building Performance and Diagnostics from Pittsburgh-based Carnegie Mellon University. We love those Pittsburgh people. Welcome back, Dr. Zhao.
Thank you. Thank you, Joe. Glad to be here. Thank you, Z-Man.
Thank you.
Good to have you back. You know, the proposed topic for this week was keeping our homes and buildings a safe summer oasis, and we will do that, but I thought we'd expand it a little bit to get into some other current topics and also not just focus on summer, but year-round. I want to start with a committee. I'm on an AIHA committee, and they're working on a proposed, they're actually updating an indoor air quality, indoor environmental quality practitioner guideline, essentially, you know, the types of things we should know when we're doing this kind of work. And they've kind of proposed to call this atypical environmental hazards. So the kind of things we don't see all the time, but we do see periodically. And they're looking at wildfire smoke and mosquito fogging. Let's start with wildfires. That's current. What are your thoughts on the hazards first of wildfire smoke, both as it's occurring, but also smoke particulate that's left behind in buildings and on buildings after a fire?
Yeah, wildfire definitely is a major concern in the summer for most of the East Coast cities. What I experience every day for basically the 4 days of this week, every day there's the AQI level. AQI stands for Air Quality Index. The AQI level in New York City is above 50, 70. I think there was one day for 100. And that's basically the whole week of this week until today is getting better. So it's a major concern. Why is it a concern? Because wildfire smoke contains mostly PM 2.5, which is particulate matter 2.5. It's one of the most dangerous air pollution in our world. And for short term, when you experience PM 2.5, when you're exposed to that, you have sore throats, you feel uncomfortable in your upper respiratory system for short term. And if you have asthma or other respiratory disease, that can be a major trigger for that. But even for longer term, if you're exposed to high level of pollution, of PM 2.5 longer and consistently, those particles are so small and tiny, they basically go through your upper respiratory system, goes all the way to your lung, to your bloodstream. So those tiny particles flow with your blood and end it up into your heart and the vessel system, so cardiovascular system, which leads to basically all sorts of cardiovascular disease. That is why PM 2.5 is #1 environmental risk factors for not only your lung disease, which makes sense, COPDs and others, but also it's #1 environmental risk factor for your cardiovascular disease, because those things can go through your lung system and go to your body. So that's the risk of smoke, wildfire smoke. And now we know even it's happening in Canada, it can spread out all the way to most part of East Coast US.
Yeah, I saw where some of our local, one day it was Chicago, another day it was, I think, New York City, but we were the most polluted cities in the world. Other people around the world deal with this year round, I guess, which is, obviously a huge issue. How do you recommend people prepare their buildings to deal with this kind of issue? You've got, buildings that in many cases are bringing in outdoor air, in some cases, on purpose or through controlled means, mechanical means, and other times it's infiltration. How do you suggest people prepare their buildings better for this type of thing? Because it's going to keep happening.
Yeah, it will keep happening. The rate and the scale of wildfires are getting bigger and bigger because of climate change and other issues in our environment. So yeah, it's getting bigger and bigger. What's I think for immediate reaction, immediate remediation for wildfire smoke is making sure your windows and all the doors and cracks are sealed as much as possible. I think the first layer of defense is preventing it coming indoors. Once it's happening, perhaps use towels and other things. Whatever you learn from fire drill, I think can apply that as a short-term gap measure. But longer term for our buildings, making buildings more airtight, that's not only beneficial for air pollution, but also for saving energy. It's a huge deal. So there are insulation, there are filling gaps. There are very professional services and tools to do that. We can do that as the first step of defense. At the same time, for our mechanical systems, let's make sure our mechanical system have good filters, and you do regularly maintain them and replace them. So the filters are not dirty, first of all. Secondly, they're effectively filtering out the pollutions, meaning the filter level should be MERV 13 or above for mechanical systems. And then at another layer is I would definitely recommend adding standalone portable air purifiers. Those things work really, really fast, work really effective, and they're close. You're basically standing next to us. which is closer to our breathing zone, meaning the air change through a portable air purifier delivers clean air directly to us, much closer in a very fast time frame. And that's also affordable and portable. So those are definitely good choices. When you have done all the things you can for your building, adding air purifiers, that's definitely a good choice. And obviously, making sure, if you still wants to make sure you are aware if it's happening. Sometimes you can see the sky. In the past 4 days, the sky in New York is gray. You know that. But sometimes it's not easy, or you don't have the chance to see the sky. Adding a sensor, adding an air quality monitor in your home or in your building, which is very affordable nowadays. You can buy anything between $50 to $500. You can buy air quality monitors that has PM 2.5. And then you can visually see that on your phone, on the wall, on the digital screen. So those are definitely good things to have. So you're aware. Obviously, you can. There are apps, weather app on your iPhone can tell you what's happening outdoors. That's a good thing to know. So be aware, be prepared. I think that's the message.
I think people are also more aware of the government website, airnow.gov.
Yes.
Maybe, John, you could pull that up while we're talking a little bit. And I've also got a text question. Didn't making our buildings more airtight lead us into our current IAQ problems after buildings were made more airtight in response to the energy crisis of 1973? How do we do it differently? Make them airtight, but...
Yes, making it airtight is definitely partly created the energy problem, the IAQ problem for the energy purpose in 1970s and 80s. The sick building syndromes and all of these things happened during that time because everything's sealed off. We don't have fresh air. But the difference now versus then was at that time, we just sealed the building, but we didn't provide enough fresh air. But now we know fresh air is important. Outdoor air is important. So building airtight building has to be accompanied with dedicated outdoor air, meaning you have to have good ventilation system to bring in enough air from outdoors, filtered air from outdoors with CO2 level diluted. That's always go hand in hand. At the same time, making building more airtight doesn't mean you eliminate operable windows. Operable windows in most part of US, except for during wildfire times, opening windows are still the best strategy for natural ventilation, in my opinion. Because if you don't have wildfire and you're not living in a major transportation hub or in the major highway, then your outdoor air are typically pretty good in most part of the US. So in that case, opening windows are the easiest, the cheapest way to cool and to bring in fresh air from outdoors. So yeah, the takeaway is making airtight building together with good ventilation and operable windows.
What about ozone? I mean, there are areas of the country like Los Angeles and others that have high ozone. They have these ozone action days. What can we do, in addition to sealing off the building? We still have to get that CO2 removed. We still have to get some kind of ventilation. Are there any good mechanical methods for removing ozone?
It's very difficult, to be honest. Even in New York, I think when traffic is high, ozone level outdoors is high because ozone typically is generated by the transportation, the pollutions of nitrous dioxide, NOxes, and other pollutions from industrial cars, and then they have a chemical reaction because of sunlight, and then generating ozone. And when ozone is high, it's really difficult. Well, first of all, it's defending it, making sure it's not coming indoors. But once it's there, indoors is pretty difficult to remove. In theory, activated carbon or other sorbent material in filters, some in mechanical system filters, some in air purifiers, in theory, they can absorb that. But it depends on the level of the concentration, depends on where they are. And if let's just say if your ozone level is high enough indoors already, and we have to use air purifiers to deal with that, that's a major problem. You cannot have air purifiers go with you and sleep with you all the time. So I think that's in theory is a good methods to remove ozone. It can be done. There are also PCO materials, the photocatalytic oxidation materials. Those materials basically use UVC as a very strong oxidation light to chemically break or combine the ozone particles, the ozone chemicals into other types of gas. And that can be done inside air purifiers or inside the HVAC system. That can be done too. But at the same time, during the chemical reaction of oxidation, more ozone can be generated for that process. So it's a very complex reaction. Yeah, I don't think there's a best solution if we say purifier and filters can deal with PM 2.5 really effectively. We trust that solution is doable. I wouldn't say ozone is at that level. It's difficult to remove once it's in there.
I got a text and then a comment. Are you proposing better outdoor air pollution controls? I mean, that's kind of a no-brainer, I guess, huh?
Yeah, of course. But it's definitely beyond any building industry capability, right? It's about transportation, it's about urban planning, it's about all the regulations in cities, in rural places. So definitely proposing that, but it's definitely beyond my capability, but I'm sure it's something we all want to happen.
You know, I noticed you've got a picture on the wall there. It looks like a picture of a map of Pittsburgh and the three rivers. So it must be from your time at CMU. We had pretty serious, we're one of the top 10 worst cities in the country for PM 2.5 at a lot of times. And we also get some ozone. But I was also reading recently how they're trying to use 222 nanometer disinfection, essentially. But that also is now showing that produces some ozone indoors, because the other comment is ozone is so reactive that indoor levels are typically much lower than outside. However, the reaction products in the indoor air may be more hazardous. So maybe you could touch on that a little for our audience.
Yes, what you mentioned, the specific nanometer of the purple light, we call UVC ultraviolet light, at that nanometer, at that level, that's typically people use for sanitization. You see in hospitals or in some restaurants, you see those purple lights. They can kill bacteria, viruses. Those are very effective. As a matter of fact, I believe during COVID, the New York City subway is being treated with UVC lighting every night. I think so. So those are the good methods to destroy the bacteria and viruses and fungi. That's good. But the problem is the UVC lighting, depending on the different spectrum, I think it's from 220 to 250 to 80, 90. The spectrum of that is called ultraviolet light. And different spectrum may produce different level of ozone, because the mechanism of that lighting kill or deactivate viruses and bacteria is through oxidation. And oxidation basically is combining different molecules into the air, into the pollutants or the different gases in the air. Then those gases can form new gases. Think about it. Different molecules are break apart because of the lighting. And then those break apart molecules can assemble. They call reactive gases. And those gases can be even more harmful. For example, if there are SOx, sulfur dioxide or monoxide, or those elements are in the air, or NOxes, natural dioxide or monoxide, those things in the air, and then they can combine and become other harmful gases. That's possible. But again, it's a very complex system, and every sample you test in the air will be different from the other samples. So it's really hard to say. We know ozone can be an indicator or proxy of those things happening. If there's ozone in the air, then those things will be happening. But what's the end result of those reactions? There's no one answer fits all for that.
For those that are interested in more on the 222 versus 254, Dr. Dustin Poppendike just did a seminar or webinar for, I think it was for EPA. He's with the National Institute of Standards and Technology, talking about recent work they've done on determining whether the 222 versus 254. With 254, you're just getting upper room irradiation. They're not allowing that to hit people. 222, they're actually bathing the whole room, but they're looking at that actually, from what I saw in the video, creating more ozone than the 254. So it's kind of like a catch-22. What do you do, Doc?
Exactly. There's a lot of, we did so much work in the beginning of the pandemic, and we've seen his work as well on ultraviolet light, UVC lighting, and understanding the industry, how, practically speaking, even you can pinpoint that nanometer from the lighting standpoint. Over time, if you're using if you are not using LED is very stable. If you're using other traditional ways of producing that light, over time, the phosphor on the light can wear off. Then the nanometer, the bandwidth can change over time. And if that changes, the nanometer changes, the effect of that will change as well. So there are a lot of complex issues in that, which I'm not an expert in, but I've read many of the studies done by experts like what you just mentioned. So yeah, it's a complex catch-22 problem, and there's no perfect solution yet.
John, maybe you could we put the link out on today's show announcement. It was one of the the articles and links, John. If you could find that and put it in the chat, and then Cliff can put it in the blog if people want to follow up on it. All right, let's move to another topic here. I want to talk a little bit about heat. Obviously a huge issue right now. People are, suffering through heat. Phoenix is over 110 for, I think, 20 days now, which is just like, I can't even imagine that. I'm not a heat guy. That's why I live up north. So what can we do to better prepare our buildings for these types of heat extremes, both homes, and residential and commercial buildings?
Yeah, I think heat wave this summer hit almost everywhere in the globe. And in the US, I think we are in a better situation in terms of equipment of buildings. Most of our buildings, even in the north, have some sort of air conditioner, even as a window unit. But in Europe, in some parts of Asia, a lot of buildings, I believe there's stats, only 10-20% of buildings in France or in other parts of Europe have air conditioner. Traditionally, they rely on the natural ventilation of opening windows or fans. I think that's what they do. So I think globally, I think we're already better prepared than others. But even that, I think the heat coming at us at 100 more degrees is really, really challenging. Again, I think airtight building with good insulation is one thing. But think about what heat is. Heat basically is two things. One is just air temperature too high for us. We're baked in the air, that's too high. Number two is solar heat gain. If you have direct solar hitting at you, regardless of the air temperature, you will feel really hot. So in our buildings, for solar heat gain, what we can do, besides all the air conditioner, the Euro thing, what we can do is using shades. You can see in my background, my shades is we call blackout shades, and it's a white color. So it basically, if you close the shades, some of the majority of the solar heat gain will be reflected back through the windows to outside. They're also shading externally that can do that. Very rare in residential, but in commercial buildings you have that. So preventing solar heat gain is one way that, besides cooling the air, for us to feel better. Also think about thermal comfort. The heat we feel, it's a thermal sensation, meaning what temperature we feel is different from the air temperature you read on the thermometer, and it's also different from the surface temperature or the solar heat gain temperature. So the thermal sensation we feel can be reduced by air movement. So you use a fan, doesn't cool your air at all, doesn't change the air temperature. But you feel cooler because it increases air movement, that increase the evaporation of our body heat. So we feel better. It's the same air temperature, but I think that's another way using fans. But to be honest, it's really, if you are already in existing building, it's really hard to deal with that, except for adding air conditioner and close the window, close the shades, adding fans. But if you're building new buildings, making sure the orientation, the external shading design, and having external, let's say, landscape, trees and other plants, I think that's a better way if you are designing new buildings.
You could have big overhangs as well that block out some of that sun. What about relative humidity and doing a better job of controlling relative humidity? Like a lot of people up north here, they're not ready for the heat, but they are ready for making sure that we reduce the relative humidity, especially if they have basements, etc. How much does that help with heat?
It definitely helps from the sensation standpoint, because the thermal comfort is a function of the air temperature, relative humidity, air movement, and other radiant temperature that surround you. So if you're reducing the relative humidity below 60, typically 40 to 60 is what we recommend, a good range for your humidity to fall in. So higher than 60, you will feel more humid, which will feel more warm. So reducing humidity during summertime to below 60% is definitely the right way to do. And there are dehumidifiers. There are like small packs of things you can buy that absorb humidity from the air. And then today, most of the heat pump, air conditioner, they have dry. They have the dehumidification function. So those are all the good ways to dehumidify. That's a really good point.
You know, last week we had Rob Jonkman on. He's with the Canadian Wood Council. And one of the things he mentioned, and I remember reading Cliff's blog, was just excellent last week. If you haven't read it, you got to check it out. Rob and Cliff put a lot of time in that. But anyway, one of the things he mentioned was the use of wood in indoor environments can help somewhat modulate the humidity, because wood absorbs moisture and then, lets it off based on, it just absorbs and lets it off. Have you done any experimentation at Delos Labs on more passive ways of reducing relative humidity in buildings?
We've actually not done the research ourselves, but we've seen similar research done by others. Wood, I think clay or adobe in some parts of the world can also, there are studies about that as well. It's both. It's a function of both. Both the thermal mass of the adobe is really big, meaning they don't change temperature quickly. They can absorb more heat. By the same time, they may have a function of regulating humidity, not by a lot, but for some reason. Yeah, I think those using material as a way to regulate heat is a possibility. There's a material called phase change material. Phase change material, what they can do is they can absorb more heat than regular material, because during the phase change process, more heat needs to be exchanged. And those type of material, if you use that for insulation and for wall construction, that's a possibility. I've seen that in some of the academic settings. I'm not sure if they are commercialized yet. You can buy, or what's the cost of that. But phase change material, those are good things for heat regulation passively.
This also reminds me of some shows we did where Cliff, we were talking about disaster restoration. So a lot of times after hurricanes, et cetera, there's no electric. And one of the ways to try and prevent secondary damage from relative humidity, Cliff, you were, maybe you could tell our listeners again, you were hanging some kind of material in a bag that kind of absorbed that moisture.
Well, Joe, many people are familiar with damp rid, and what damp rid is calcium chloride, and we know it oftentimes in the north as ice melt. So as long as you're using calcium chloride, that's oftentimes what's in those packages. And damp rid has a tray. Typically that container has a tray. You place the calcium chloride on the tray, and it drips down into a holding container. So in a disaster restoration situation, what you can do is take a pillowcase, and instead of having a small container, you buy the calcium chloride in 50-pound bags, and you can then suspend those bags indoors. And particularly if you have air movement and a fan going over it, it's pretty efficient, particularly if you don't have any electrical power. So it definitely works.
Something worth maybe doing a little more work on. With all the heat we're having these days, I think it's something that we've got to find more innovative ways of cooling people off. Before we get back to Dr. Zhao here, I want to go through halftime. Let's thank our sponsors, John. Our marquee sponsor is First On Site, your trusted full-service disaster recovery and property restoration company at firstonsite.com. Our association sponsors are ACGIH, Advancing Careers of Professionals in Environmental Health, Industrial Hygiene, and Safety, interested in defining their science. ACGIH.org. AIHA, Healthy Workplaces, A Healthier World. AIHA.org. The Environmental Information Association, EIA's multidisciplinary membership, collects, generates, and disseminates information concerning environmental and occupational health hazards in the built environment at EIA-USA.org. The IICRC, a nonprofit standards development and certifying body for the cleaning and restoration industry, IICRC.org. The Restoration Industry Association, the oldest and largest nonprofit professional trade association dedicated to providing leadership and promoting best practices through advocacy, standards, and professional qualifications for the restoration industry at restorationindustry.org. Industry sponsors are Particles Plus, feature-rich particle counters and air quality instrumentation. Count on us, particlesplus.com. TSI Inc., an industry leader in precision instrumentation for monitoring indoor air. Learn how to expand your IAQ investigations, TSI.com. Tramex Meters, developing modern dynamic moisture meters and humidity monitoring systems since 1974, tramexmeters.com. And Healthy Indoors Magazine, a free online magazine for industry professionals and consumers, healthyindoors.com. All right, we're back with Dr. Jie Zhao. Doc, we recently had a really bad train derailment on the Ohio border, not far from Pittsburgh. And they had hazardous chemicals in there, and they actually set the thing on fire, believe it or not, to try and get rid of those chemicals because they were concerned that if they tried to offload them in a more a less environmentally problematic way, I guess is the best way to put it, that it might blow up and make things even worse. I'm wondering, what could a building owner do to help prepare for that type of event, or, just these what they call atypical environmental hazards, something that pops out of nowhere?
Yeah, I think the key is to be aware the impact of those disasters on your air and water. So you have to consume air and water every day. I think that's the main issue. And be aware either through your monitor, or at least be aware there are scientific agencies and professional services that can do the testing for you. And I think those are the things average homeowner needs to be aware. Okay, if something happens, if I have a real road behind my house, what can I do? What are the numbers I can call when these things happen? So I think that's the level of preparedness we should be aware of, because no one would know what are the trains carrying. So it's almost impossible to prepare for anything unless you have a bunker, right? So it's just be aware what to test and who to call. That's my
guess having some of those air cleaners we talked about earlier, portable air cleaners, might be able to help. I guess it depends on what type of hazard. It's particulate would help. If it was chemicals, it may not help very much unless you had some activated carbon or something like that as a part of the system.
Definitely.
Very interesting. All right, let me ask this. A few other current events that we've seen, and by the way, one of the comments brought a past show to mind. Cooling people is key for heat stress, but also can cause other issues like, Legionella has been recognized as a hazard associated with misting systems in grocery produce areas, for instance. We had a show with a group called BioPlanet, and they are actually being hired by groups like the ACC. I can't remember which particular conference it was, to help cool some of their athletes when they're overheated during, stressful workouts. I'm wondering if there's some use in that, maybe even indoors when people, they don't have air conditioning, they're kind of stuck, maybe some kind of misting or cooling with a system like the BioPlanet uses. Cliff, what kind of system was that? Electrostatic, I think.
Yeah, no, it was, it created electrostatic droplets. So instead of kind of going into the air, they would be more attracted to the people. But I think, fogging is going to work, I would think, just as effectively. And I think they've been using, you see it on NFL games and, football games. They have fans that have, nozzles incorporated, and then you have the combination, I think, both of the airstream plus you have the small droplets. And, I think outdoors they're pretty effective. Indoors, you just got to realize you're adding moisture, and you add too much moisture, you're going to have some other issues.
Yeah, that's exactly the point I want to make as well. In tropical climates, we've seen in parks, in the pathways when people are walking, there are a lot of those systems used in Singapore, right, in Middle East. But indoors, you're definitely, because outdoors, when you spray, like 2 seconds, they're evaporated by the sun. But indoors, you're adding the humidity level, and it's easily going above 60%. And when that's happening, mold, the Legionella, all of these things can happen. So indoors, it's also damaging your electronics and furnitures and all of these things. So it's I think it's definitely one way to do it. But fans, I think fans, whether it's portable fans, there are fans in the ceiling or portable or even personal fans that you can put literally in your face, you will feel cool immediately. While not impacting others. I think those fans are definitely a much safer way for cooling if you don't have air conditioning.
Let me change the topic a little bit. I saw an article, and I think I put this one in today's show announcement as well. It was on biophilic design. And it made me think about our first interview, because you specialize in human building interactions, and I assume that's a big part of what you look at. Some of the things they recommended were to play nature sounds, natural colors and images, use natural scents, and also leafy plants. And I thought, some of those I can't see any problem with, natural colors and images, natural sounds, but the use of scents and leafy plants, I wonder if you could comment on the pros and cons of those two recommendations.
Yeah. I think just on the concept of biophilia or biophilic design, I think it was a psychology term invented, I think in 1980s by a environmental psychology professor. And the term literally means human has a natural tendency to feel happier, to just have a higher mood when they're closer to nature. Nature meaning it can be plants, can be the nature color, can be animals, or other human beings. So that's the psychology term. But over the years, past 20, 30, 40 years, so many hundreds of study of neuroscience, psychology, building sciences have already proved the biophilic effect or biophilia as a fact is working. So biophilia or biophilic design in buildings or in structures can make people feel less stressed, higher mood, and more productive in most cases. And we've actually, in our Weitzman lab, in our Weitzman laboratory in Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota, we've actually done a study comparing people's working productivity with biophilia or without. And we had really good results showing with biophilic in office setting, people feel more productive and will feel more satisfied. And those are real, first of all. And then in terms of exact what to do to achieve biophilic design, there's visual, there's audio, there's olfactory, the smells, right? And then those are the key three things in biophilic design. For visual, whatever you put in that's closer to nature, whether it's a TV, having nature animations or nature videos, or it's just designing with wood or bamboo walls, all of these things are good. Even fake plants, there are studies showing fake plants can be not as good as real plants, but can be better than nothing. So for visual, I don't see much problem, except for some fake plants will produce VOC immediately. They're plastic, basically. And then for audio, I don't see much problem either, because audio in terms of nature sound, birds and oceans, and these are definitely making people feel more relaxed. Even, fire cracking of the fireplace in winter, that's a really good way to make people feel warmer without increasing the heat. I think what you're talking about for scent, for smell, that could be a controversial issue with IAQ specifically, indoor air quality, because the scents are typically coming from, I would say, they're from, most scents are VOCs, volatile organic compounds. We know not all VOCs are bad, right? You smell the orange, you eat banana, those smells, bacon smell, right? Those are good smells. Those are not harmful. But depending on how those smells were produced, if they're from natural extraction of essential oils from natural plants, most likely they're not harmful itself if you don't drink them, if you don't consume them. So when you displace them into the air, that's when the problems comes. Even you have really good natural oil, you want them to evaporate or changing into gases naturally. You do not want to put them into humidifiers, which I know almost all humidifier companies advertising to put essential oil in it, and then you smell good. Yeah, but the what do you call the ultrasonic humidifiers who have like the mist, you can see the mist. What they do is they basically break the water into really tiny particles. They are particles. They are PMs. They are PM 2.5, PM 10, PM 1s. They are PMs. And if you have pure water PM, it's fine. It's just water. But if you mix water with essential oil, become PM, no one knows what's going to happen. There's no specific study showing I guess there's mixed results showing if the essential oils or the scent mixture with water breaking into small particles going into your lungs, what's going to happen? No one knows that. But for safety, we don't want that. because we don't drink essential oils, we don't consume them. We smell them in very tiny quantity because they are gases versus liquids. Those are two very different things. So I think that's the caveat. If you want to use smells, essential oils, definitely use the ones that's naturally evaporating or even burning. I mean, heating, not burning, heating them up so they have a faster evaporation cycle. That's good, that's okay. But definitely not liquefy them into water, and definitely not using candles, because any candle burning will generate PM as well as TVOC. And if you burn, even you burn natural oil from orange, let's say, should be harmless. But when you burn that oil, we don't know what's going to happen. And no candle is made natural without like artificial chemicals or fragrance. So that's I think that's the recommendation. It's great that you smell something, because smell is our strongest memory recall function. You smell something, you always recall the favorite thing you're thinking about, linking to that smell. But be aware of creating air quality issues.
Cliff, I know this is a topic dear to your heart. You have a comment or follow up?
Yeah, just a couple. One of the subjects that was mentioned was, smelling oranges and so on and so forth. And typically in these orange pills, there's a common chemical called derailment, and that is very, very reactive with ozone. There have been a lot of studies on that reactivity. And these chemicals are typically essential oils or oils, and water's water, and oil and water generally don't mix. So what's going to happen is you're going to have those oils floating on top of the water.
Yep.
And maybe the best thing to do is, I'm sure the doctor's probably familiar with some of these reed systems, where it's essentially oftentimes you'll see them in hotels, restaurants, and so on and so forth, where there may be a jar of essential oil, and they have a reed, which essentially it's a wood material that is solid, but it's thin, almost looks like a stir that you would get in mixing a drink or whatever. And those evaporate, small amounts into the air, and that might be the best way to do it. I think maybe even better than heat, because with heat, what's going to happen is the more volatile components of the oil are going to come off first, and you're going to have this, the less volatile materials left over. So I think with the reed stuff, it would probably be the best way. And I agree that you should use, natural products. And you have to be careful, because a lot of times they're sold, as natural, and they may be, but then they add things to them to extend them. A lot of times they'll add propylene glycol or something like that in order to extend it and make you think you're getting more for your money, and so on and so forth. So you need to be careful.
Definitely. The takeaway is to never put it into your humidifier.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Well, I've got another topic that kind of it sometimes drives me a little crazy, and that's the leafy plants. They're oversold, unfortunately, as air cleaners, and I wonder if you would comment on that.
Yeah. Again, I'm a plant lover. I love my plants. You see, I have so many plants behind my screen. But I would never say my plants are filtering my air. There are studies. We actually done one study of plants, a plant wall, those commercial plant wall, its effectiveness on VOC absorption. Yeah, it can do it. It can absorb the root system, and the soil system can absorb some VOCs. That's demonstrable in laboratory. But the effectiveness, the quantity and the efficiency of that is so low that you basically need to have like every inch of your wall and your ceiling to have those things there to match maybe one small air purifier's effectiveness. So I wouldn't call that effective way of IAQ. It's a great thing for biophilia. You will feel better. It looks great. And sometimes, if they flower, it smells good. All these things are good. And if during daytime, they can absorb CO2 to some degree. They can absorb CO2 and generate, oxygen. But again, depending on the amount of plants you have at home, not recommending putting in bedroom, because in bedroom during nighttime they're releasing CO2, so which you don't want. But in general, we would never say until we find a new plants that maybe can do that. It's a IAQ solution. It's a biophilia solution. It's a great solution for biophilia. It's great for your mental health. It's great for your stress, for your mood, for your happiness, satisfaction, as a hobby, but not effective for IAQ.
What about these walls of plants that they're putting in some buildings? Is that the same thing?
That's what I was talking about. Yeah.
Yeah. That was the study we've done together with BRE, British Research Establishment. We've done a study on one of those big walls, commercial buildings, office buildings. People put on the entire wall of that. Yes, they can absorb VOCs, some type of VOCs, through their roots and the soil system. That's doable. But compare, it's just not practical in terms of you can have one air purifier for $200 absorbing, I don't know, many more times of VOCs. Then that's thousands of dollars of plant wall on your wall.
Well, and the other thing that we IAQ practitioners run into is they're not maintained properly. They're overwatered. There's water here. There's water there. They collect dust. I think I wish these articles would at least explain the pros and the cons, not just the pros. And sometimes I see too much of that. But let's go to the roundup, John. All right, the roundup. I want to thank Tramex Meters for joining our family of sponsors, and also the Environmental Information Association. Great to have both of you on board. I guess my last topic that I wanted to bring up is, and this is a very current event, ASHRAE recently came out with a new standard on the control of infectious aerosols. I don't know if you've had a chance to review that document, look it over, but what are your thoughts if you have?
I've heard of it. I have not got a chance to read the entire standards yet, but we definitely think it's a great significant achievement and a step towards creating awareness and creating regulation and creating regulating solutions for the entire industry. It's a great thing for us to talk about it. Us in the HVAC industry, in the IAQ industry, in the building industry. It's a great thing that we're doing this. And once I have a chance to review the full standards, I think I will have more comments. But definitely a great step forward.
Yeah, I think the biggest new concept is that they've developed a formula for determining like the equivalent air changes when you include things like we were talking about, filtration, standalone filters or UV lights or something like that. And they have a way of quantifying now what the equivalent air changes would be for that. Have you looked at that or heard about that at all?
Yes, I've again, I think that might be the only part I read in the EACH, right? We all know ACH, air change rate, but what's confusing is traditionally when we talk about ACH, we always talk about outdoor ACH, bringing outdoor in together with the air change rate. But what's happening is air purifier companies and other companies who do not bring outdoor air in, but doing internal filtration of the air, started using the word ACH, and which creates confusion and sometimes misleading claims. Say, hey, these air purifiers can do 2, 3, 4 ACH, which consumer wouldn't know what are they talking about. Are they bringing fresh air for CO2? Are they just internal circulation for PM reduction? So those are the things that EACH, equivalent air change rate, will come in really handy. So we were differentiating, okay, there's outdoor ACH, then there's EACH equivalent, meaning it's not outdoor air, but it's internal circulation of making sure the pollutants were filtered out. Those are good things.
Another I wanted to ask you real quick before you go. You're the head of Delos Labs, and I picked up an article where one of your colleagues was studying fire-related issues, I believe up in Minnesota at the lab, and we're going to have him on a future show. What other current types of projects is your group working on?
Yeah, I think we're working on a lot with monitoring the air quality, setting up the benchmark with different building types, different clients, domestically in the US and internationally as well. So we always believe the first step of solving any problems is to be aware what is the problem, what is the real issue or the things we can improve upon. That's why in terms of IAQ, in terms of air quality, we always believe awareness, benchmarking, baselining the conditions in your home, in your building, in your office, in your school is the first step towards any real meaningful improvements.
And so does that mean you're looking at like low-cost sensors or developing other ways of evaluating or doing these benchmarks?
Yeah, we're developing studies. We're using low-cost sensors. We're using sensors available in the market as well. So yes, all of the above.
And what are your thoughts? Where are we headed with these low-cost sensors? Are they, I mean, I know we're still getting better and better at it, but will they be the thing that, will we be able to replace some of these more expensive gadgets that I have to use on indoor air quality investigations?
Yeah, I think depending on the goal of using the sensor, for average consumer or for non-scientific studies, if your goal is to see the difference, to see the benchmark, to know what could be a problem and you want to improve and see the difference, the absolute accuracy to me is less important than its practicality of is it cheap enough for people to just buy it like they buy anything else in their home. If it's as cheap as the Google speaker, I believe more people will have them at their home and they will be more aware of their air quality problem. And they will know, although I would say, I have 2 air purifiers and 1 sensor in my home, and the 3 readings will never agree to each other. But what I can see is they are 20-30% off among each other. But I know every time I cook, all 3 will jump up. All 3 will be peak from green to red. And that's good enough as a home, not as a scientist, but that's good enough as a homeowner to know, okay, every time I cook, I should turn on my range hood, I should open my window. That's a good indicator. And that's the value of those low-cost sensors. Are they good for studies? No.
Gotcha. Cliff, any final thoughts or questions?
No, I'm good, Joe. Thanks.
Dr. Zhao, before we go, we always like to give you the last word. Any final thoughts, anything we missed, any final comments?
Now, just want to thank you again for having me here again, Joe, and the Z-Man. So again, always a pleasure and love to share more knowledge and making sure air quality is more and more broadly understood and being recognized as one of the most important things for our health and well-being.
Well, our thanks go out to Dr. Jie Zhao for joining us again. I want to thank my co-host, Z-Man, Cliff Zlotnick. John, you got to have faith at the controls. Of course, our sponsors and our loyal audience will be back next Friday at noon with the next episode of IAQ Radio Plus.
For IAQ Radio, I'm Spike Reel saying thanks for listening.